Had this sitting around for a while. Settlers of Canaan. It is a Settlers of Catan game. It's actually made by a different company, but it's registered, so no reason to complain about that. Why did I pick this up? Well, this was actually the first of the kind of historical Settlers of Catan variants out there that I saw cheaply. And I picked this up. I think I picked up one other, Merchants of Catan. I don't know. I had played Successors of Catan, which I think was the first of the historical modules. And, it kind of intrigued me because it added a little bit of another layer of something to that whole Catan experience. And unlike a lot of the more modern Eurogamers, I was never a great fan of Catan, but I thought it was a clever game, and I was almost always willing to play it. It worked well enough for me. I know there's a lot of haters nowadays, hey, too much luck, whatever. Well, I'm not that kind of gamer, right? The Euros have moved along into this, all your decisions must be key to the game and everything like that, and luck should play a minimal role, whatever. Yeah, well, they didn't start out that way, and this was back when they were called German games, and they were not, they followed certain design principles, but they weren't what they've become. Let's just put it that way. And some of the ones that, de-emphasized luck took a certain route. Anyway, why am I doing this before Settlers of Catan? I don't know. I've had this longer, and I just figured I need to get something that I can put out there and start playing quickly. Because the options are, like, I can do what I did yesterday, which while I was playing a game, I was also just basically watching fucking Bloody Beaver episodes all day. And eventually, late at night, I started cutting into my rulebook. After my little 4th of July walk. Alright. I am going to go over the rules, not just because it's different from Catan, but also because I could see some people picking this one up based on the fact that, they've got their biblical interest wedded by the idea. And honestly, that's a part of the desire for me, not because I'm particularly interested in biblical studies, but I'm interested in the idea of the settlement of that region of the Near East and why Jerusalem grew to be so big and stuff like that. Well, this game does not try to present that. It uses Jerusalem, it's presented here, but it does it only as sort of a game ending and victory condition situation. This only relies upon the Jewish settlement of the region and, well, the Jewish tribes, whatever that means. Okay, you got your biblical interpretation of that, but you also have an archaeological record that's present that seems to conflict in certain ways. Very interesting sort of ways. Anyway, leaving that whole story alone, let's take a look at what we got. Each player has a set of pieces, settlements, these little houses, cities. This is their victory point marker. Oh, not quite sure what to do with it. I think it goes on this track that runs from 2 to 12. You probably, you start with a couple of victory points at the beginning of the game. The new thing is these guys, which are stones that you're going to build the city of Jerusalem with. The board itself is similar to Catan. It looks familiar. It looks rather hideous, actually, but just the garish colors staring out. I don't remember any of the Mayfair stuff looking this ugly. But it's functional. Like the historical Catan games, the geography's fixed, and the numbers are fixed on that geography. Certain terrain occurs in certain locations, and it's going to have certain probability of showing up. This is a weakness. I actually don't remember if the historicals all followed exactly this setup, but they certainly had the terrain already placed. This is a weakness game-wise. One of the nice things about Settlers of Catan was the geomorphic nature, that the map kind of changed a little bit each time. Here, very quickly, you discern where your best locations are. Of course, that was part of the play of a game of Catan, was figuring out where the best locations are. And that'll be the case for me because this is my first play of the game. You have different types of terrain which create different types of stuff. Now, they're a little different, I think, name-wise. So these are called rocks. They're basically the clay function. You have your grain, your sheep, yellow and green, your forests, which produce wood, and your mountains, which produce ore. And they all serve a similar function as they do in Settlers of Catan. I don't know quite how to, flag, hey, something's going to be different here, so that people who are new to it, I don't think it's that important. There isn't that much additional role burden to this game, or difference to this game. Each player also has one of these that names their tribe, which is irrelevant, and the costs of different things. And these are exactly the same as they are in Catan, as you would expect. There's a deck of random cards in here. Many of them are priests. Others are events which you can hold on to cause certain things to occur that, may be helpful to you at the time that they occur. All right, we have a different color terrain though, supposedly. This. Is that it? I believe that's it, yeah. Instead of being the desert in this game, this allows you, when it comes up on a successful roll, to choose the type of commodity that you want to get from that. And that's pretty potent. Each player who's receiving it gets to choose what commodity they get. So that adds a little twist to things. Hey, this becomes a really interesting space, right? It's sitting on a high value location, a place that can create whatever the hell you need, and a not very, a moderate grain location. The board also has ports on it, just like Catan would. It's got two different kinds of ports. One of them allows you to trade 3 of any resource for 1 resource of your choice. The others have a specific resource that they want, and you only have to trade 2 of them in order to get whatever resource you want. Okay, let us take a look at the basic gameplay just to give you this stuff. At the beginning of the game, you determine random seating order or random order of play. I'm going to do what I normally do, which is play counterclockwise, starting from the upper left corner, and I kind of randomly played the colors. Okay. As long as it's more than 2 players, you start the game with 2 settlements and 2 roads on the map. You place your first settlement on the intersection of any numbered resource hexes, and then you place your first road connected to that first settlement. You cannot place any of your settlements along here. There's 11 spaces that connect to Jerusalem. They say 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. The important question here was, could you build a settlement down here just to reach Jerusalem? It's not a good move in general, but if it had been allowed, but it appears it's not a playable space. which makes sense. It is a C. Okay. Then you go clockwise. Each person puts one settlement on one road. After the last player places his first settlement, the last player gets to go again, and then you go in reverse. So whoever goes last gets 2 picks in a row. First player gets the first and last pick, etc. The snake formation. Now, there's a restriction here in general. You cannot place a settlement next to another settlement. I'm trying to see if that... I don't know if they have that exception in here, but that's a general exception throughout the, or restriction throughout the game. Now, the numbers here are important for this because they are going to determine how likely a given resource, a given hex is to produce. You're going to be rolling 2 dice every turn, basically, and so like 7 is the most common number, 8 and 6 are the next most common, and those are highlighted for that reason, and so on down the road. And eventually, when you start hitting 2 and 12, those are just not, it's possible they will never produce. So do not worry about them. Okay. During your turn, you can do the following things. First, you roll the dice for resource production. That generates a number, and all hexes with that number will produce the resource of the type that they generate. Player's choice here. If you have a settlement attached on the vertex of one of those hexes, you get 1 of that type of resource, and this would be ore. If you have a city there, you get 2 of that type of resource. Cities are better. And then after that, you're allowed to trade resources with other players. And basically, you, I believe, you don't have to. But if you're going to do it, I think both players have to actually exchange resources. But you make an offer, hey, I've got a sheep for a grain, and does anybody want to give me a grain for a sheep? And then somebody might be like, well, I'll give you a grain for a sheep and something else, or I'll give you a grain for 2 sheep, or something along those lines. Once you've exhausted your attempts to get any trades with other players, you're then allowed, and I believe you're allowed to do as many of these as you wish, you then are allowed to make trades with the external ports. And like I said, you can always make, whether you have a port or not, a 4-to-1 trade, where you trade in 4 of one type of resource and get any resource of your choice for it. If you're connected to a 3-to-1 port, you can trade 3 of any one type of resource for 1 resource back of your choice. But these other ports have a request for a particular type of resource. And unless you can hook up that resource, it's not particularly good. Now, if we look at this, sheep are nicely connected to where there are sheep. Wood is nicely connected to where there's wood. Metal or is connected to where there's metal. Grain where there's grain. And clay where there's clay. Well, this almost never happens this nicely in Catan, but, you know, it kind of makes, I don't know. I don't know which way to put that. And then the final thing is you'll be allowed to build. Now, when you build, you're going to be paying costs based on this. So it'll cost you 1 wood and 1 brick to build a road. And it extends your current roads. Let me see the restriction on this. A new road must always connect to another road, settlement, or city. Roads only provide victory points if you have the longest road. The longest road has to be 5 or more pieces. And it can't be split by somebody else's settlement. And that is something that I have not touched on yet. I seem to have lost them. There they are. There are these victory point cards. I didn't explain these yet. Okay, longest road, if you have 5 or more road segments contiguous, undivided by a settlement, it's worth 2 victory points. And that gets scored on the board as soon as you meet the conditions. But if somebody meets your size of road, you lose it. If they exceed it, they take it from you. Let's hold off on this. Most priests, there are cards in here that are priests. Again, if you have at least 3 priests showing that you've played, it's worth 2 victory points if you have the most. And again, it has to literally be the most. The final one is the King's Blessing. We'll get to this in a bit, but it's whoever has built the most of Jerusalem so far. And it's worth 2 victory points and a bonus. A 2-for-1 trade with the types of your choice. So it's just like the 3-for-1 trade, but you can do it at 2-for-1. Okay. Let's go back, now that we touched those. Settlements. A settlement costs you 1 of everything except an ore. And it's worth a victory point to have a settlement. Now you're limited, you can only have 5 on the board. Your goal in the game is to get to 12 victory points. A city. You replace a settlement on the... Oh, and a settlement cannot be next to another settlement. Which is to say, if I have a settlement here on this vertex, no one can place one in any of the adjacent vertices. They could place one here. There's a vertex in between them. In order to place a settlement, you have to have a road going to it, except right at the beginning of the game. City, in order to place a city, you have to have a settlement there. You replace the settlement with the city. You get an extra victory point because the city is worth 2 instead of 1. That's going to cost you 2 grain and 3 ore. Let's skip the stone for Jerusalem. The development card. This is, again, standard rules. A grain, a sheep, and an ore. And you draw a card. And you don't know what it's going to be. Some of them are victory point cards. Some of them are events. I didn't mention the victory point cards. Some of them are priests. We'll talk about the effects of those in a little bit. Stone for Jerusalem. That's going to cost you a clay or brick and a metal. But in order to build one, you have to have a settlement along Jerusalem. Otherwise, you're allowed to build it with the aid of the person who has the settlement there. But you're going to have to pay that person. Okay. Okay. If you don't have a settlement, you can use another player's settlement. You must be able to trace a route, a trade route from a road, along roads, from one of your settlements to one of the settlements that's sitting on here. Once you do that, don't worry about who owns the roads there. You may build a road, you may build a stone for Jerusalem at the normal cost, plus 1 resource of your choice that you give to the person who owns the settlement. You just give it to them. No negotiation, nothing like that. And you place a stone of your color onto the board. One of the end game conditions is that the entire city gets filled up. Now, there is a bit of a problem, which is that these blue ones look almost exactly like the black ones to me. I wish they hadn't printed them in that kind of coloring. And no, I don't think that's my eyes. I think they're just that bad. I have some issues with... I have some troubles with determining, distinguishing between 2 shades or a couple of color issues in the blue-green spectrum. Nothing significant, but in some games it is an issue. Now, I talked about this, whoever has the most stones of their own built there. Now, it's possible that there will be stones built neutrally, not by players. and those don't count. The only thing that counts is it's the most stones of any player. So those just fill up space and help end the game. All right. Now, one thing you may have noticed, or if you play Catan, you know already, is there's no sevens on the board. None whatsoever. Whenever you roll a 7, something that's normally called the robber, but here is called the plague, and it's going to be played exactly the same way, shows up. When this happens, first a black stone gets added to Jerusalem. Nobody's going to get any resource production for that die roll. Each player who holds more than 7 resource cards has to pick half of them and throw them away and back into the bank. Uh-oh, running out of battery. Then the player who made the roll gets to put this on any space on the board that it's not currently occupying. That space will never produce as long as the plague is there. And you're allowed to steal a random resource from that person's hand. They shuffle their hand and you draw it. And, that's kind of a bonus. All right, I need to swap batteries, it would seem. The next special thing that might happen is you have these cards, which you're allowed to play. There's a number of different ones in there. A priest allows you to move the plague to a different space on the board, as if you had rolled a 7. And you get to steal a resource from somebody. That's when you play the priest card. They can also get you to the most priests if you have at least 3 of them and have the most. There are event cards, which you do what the event says. And I believe they will probably match the ones from Catan. There are victory point cards, which you may play face up during your turn, and it moves your victory point marker up that many spaces. Generally, you want to hold these. Now, normally, you're only allowed to play one of these special cards per turn, but the victory point card is an exception. You're allowed to play as many as you like, and you're allowed to play it in the turn that it's produced. You're normally not allowed to play these in the turn that you drew them. Quite often they're played right towards the end of the game, either to win the game or to claim, a high... I've never seen this done. I have not seen people who, say, well, I came in second on the score point. I've seen people argue, well, I was close to winning. I had, I was 1 victory point card short of winning or whatever and didn't turn in my hand yet. And people pretty much accept the latter because it would be foolish to reveal them early. You generally do not want to. They can't be taken away from you. They just sit in your hand. And they provide a combination of things. One, they look like you're a possible threat with priests or event cards or whatever. And 2, they count as a definite threat towards how close are you to winning the game. People pretty much count, if you're holding cards, count them each as a victory point at the end. Okay, so if somebody reaches 12 or more victory points at the end of their turn, they win the game. At the end of their turn? I don't think it matters. I think you can only reach it in your turn. So, no, because someone else could cut someone's road, and you could end up getting longest road that way. If Jerusalem ends up completely built, the game ends. And whoever has the most victory points at that point in the game wins the game. If 2 people have the same amount, whoever has the most stones out of those players, that becomes the tiebreaker. And if people are still tied, the game goes on until there's a decisive winner, whatever that means. I think you just keep playing turns until people who have stones, who have the most stones, beat the tie. Although, I would say if somebody manages to slip to the 12 in that period, they can trump over this. So, it's not clear clearly written there, but I think that makes for a more interesting choice. All right, gonna send this up and then start setting it up. Let's do a little. So, you see, I have a straw here. I know, people probably think I'm like this eco nut who, would not be using a plastic straw. The thing is, I don't know how much of an eco nut I am. I'm parsimonious. I don't like spending money on things. Now, I don't like waste, and it does vaguely bother me, people throwing out straws and stuff, but this is like a Dairy Queen straw or something along that line. It's a very solid straw. I have a few of them. What happens when I do go out and buy a drink with a straw, I end up saving the straw. And so I have a handful of these things, and they last me probably as long as people's metal straws do, just because of, losing stuff and everything. I'm still not thrilled with the plastic industry, but I sure the hell am not going to go out and buy a straw. They give really good ones out for free at some places. Anyway, that's today's miser hint of the day. Sending this up.